In spite of the dangers that threatened him, in spite of the suspicions he held, no matter how justified he believed they were, Halley knew that he must continue to follow orders and carry out his mission. His training and discipline would not permit him to disobey a superior officer, even one whose motives were suspect. If he accepted Control's warning as true and got a hold of an enemy uniform, he'd have to keep his camouflage suit with him always to make sure that the Homer was operative. That would add even more weight to the load he was carrying. By now, Solid Snake was carrying with him enough gear for 3 men. If he could find the homing device, remove it, and take it with him, Halley could leave the suit of camos behind. But first, he'd have to find an enemy uniform. They didn't come empty. He'd have to empty one. On feet as quiet as a panther's, Solid Snake sneaked up behind an unsuspecting tank guard and rabbit punched him. Out cold. Working fast, Solid Snake stripped the guard of his uniform. He slipped out of his clothes and put the body armor on again, this time next to his skin. Then he climbed into the enemy uniform and made certain the 4 key cards were safe in his pocket along with the rations. Halley picked up his camos and ran his hand carefully over the entire uniform. Sewn into the sleeve, Justin Halley located the miniaturized homing device. Now he wouldn't have to bring along the entire uniform, only the sleeve. Ripping off the sleeve, Solid Snake stuffed it into the pocket of the terrorist uniform he was now wearing. Employing the mine detector to protect him from hidden mines, Halley took his first steps out onto the minefield. Boom! 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 Behind him, Solid Snake heard a series of explosions. The tank he'd mined had been blown sky high. It was a monumental diversion, noisy and deadly. Frightened terrorists were running in every direction, yelling in fear. But Solid Snake couldn't stop to look back. Watching every step he took, Captain Halley managed to make his way through the minefield. Just ahead was a storage shed in a clearing. It must hold something vital, thought Halley. Using keycard 4, he unlocked the shed. Inside, tied to a chair, was a captured Snake Man. He had been severely beaten. Solid Snake untied the man. "Bill, it's me," he said. "Never mind the enemy uniform. It's Solid Snake." The prisoner made gasping noises. Halley knelt by the wounded man's side and put his ear close to the Solid Snake man's lips. "Dr. Petrovich is on the 2nd floor of Building 2, gasped the prisoner, and closed his eyes. As the man passed out, his fingers pointed to a tile on the floor, one that appeared to be the same as any other tile in the room, but Halley looked more closely. The tile was loose. He moved it, and underneath was key card 5. Solid Snake picked it up and pocketed it. Could he believe this man? Was Dr. Petrovich on the 2nd floor? Or was it a trap? Halley made a thorough search of the storage shed. He picked up more rations and made a very useful find. An antenna. Now the transceiver would work a lot better, and the radio transmissions from Control would come in more clearly. Justin Halley decided to try for Dr. Petrovich on the 2nd floor of Building 2, as the dying Snake Man had told him. But when he reached the 2nd floor, Solid Snake encountered a huge, deep tank of liquid between himself and his next objective. Was the liquid plain water, or something far more deadly, such as acid? Whatever it was, Captain Halley didn't trust the look of it. Even so, he was going to have to get across it somehow. He approached it with a probing look, trying to scope it out. In the center of the tank, deep under the surface of the liquid, was what appeared to be an underwater tunnel. Where did it lead? Was it the entrance to where Solid Snake should go next? Or was it another of Kataffi's traps? Or both? Once again, Solid Snake was facing a crucial test. The underwater tunnel had to be investigated. But it might be a false tunnel, with no opening at the other end. Captain Halley could be trapped there and drown. Also, he was loaded down with heavy equipment, weapons he would need to succeed in his mission. Although he was a powerful swimmer, Solid Snake would be hampered by the weight of his gear. And who knew how long the underwater tunnel might be? A few hundred yards? A mile? 10 miles? How long could Halley hold his breath? Which was the failsafe point, beyond which there was no turning back again? None of these questions had easy answers. Precious moments were only being wasted in what-ifs. There was only one thing to do, and that was to dive in. Strapping his equipment to his back, Solid Snake filled his lungs with all the air they could hold, executed a perfect jackknife into the water, and swam towards the underwater tunnel. Inside the tunnel, it was pitch black. He swam for what seemed to be a very long time. The air in Captain Halley's lungs was depleting fast, but there was still no end to the tunnel. It just went on and on, getting darker and darker, and Solid Snake realized with grim certainty that he was in a trap. It was already too late to swim back to the starting point. Halley's breath would never hold out that long, and he was already beginning to feel lightheaded. He couldn't make it to the surface, because the heavy equipment was holding him down as though he'd been tied to a rock. The situation appeared to be hopeless. Solid Snake would drown, and Metal Gear would destroy the civilized world. Yet Halley could not give up. Not while he still had air in his lungs. Suddenly, he saw at the end of the tunnel a small door. He swam to it and tried it. Locked! By now, things were turning black in front of his eyes, and there was almost no air left in his lungs. Perhaps he could unlock the door with a key card. There was very little time left. He'd only have one chance to get that door open before he blacked out and drowned. Which card should he try? The new one, keycard 5. With wet and feeble hands, Justin Halley fished the keycard out of his pocket and managed to get it into the lock. He was on the verge of passing out. And then, the secret entrance opened, and Halley swam through it, into the shallow gutter at the side of the underwater tunnel. As he did, his hand scraped along the side of the tunnel and found something. Without thinking, he held on tightly to what he'd found. Raising his face to the surface, Solid drew in great, ragged gulps of air. Looking around, he saw that he had reached the other side of the huge tank. He was saved. Wet and trembling with exhaustion, Solid Snake drew himself out of the pool and lay on the rim, panting and gasping. He'd allow himself no more than 60 seconds to get his strength back, then he had to go on. The mission was waiting. Dr. Petrovich was waiting. Maybe even here on the second floor, as the dying Snake Man had said. Halley scrambled to his feet. As he was about to shoulder his gear, he remembered the something he was holding in his hand. The thing he picked up in the underwater tunnel. He looked at it. It was keycard 6. The first room Solid Snake opened on the second floor held a prisoner, but it was not Dr. Petrovich. It was a member of the squad. As he released the Snake Man, Halley received this message. Listen to Resistance Fighter Jennifer on waveband 12048. 12048? According to Commander South's instructions, Justin Halley's transceiver had been set on 12033. Now he reset the wavelength and attached the antenna. Almost at once, Solid Snake heard loud and clear a woman's voice coming over on the transceiver. It wasn't a voice that he'd heard before. It was not Diana. "Jennifer here. I'll set up the rocket launchers. Come and get one. Over." Without delay, Hallie went in search of the rocket launchers, following Jennifer's radio signal by rotating the antenna and using it as a direction finder. The radio transmission led him around corners and through a long corridor. At the end of the corridor was a row of giant packing crates. Solid Snake realized that the crates might hold the rocket launchers, but most likely were another of Katafi's fiendish traps. Which of them contained the rocket launchers? Which was the trap? Up to now, Hallie had always stayed away from the middle of everything he'd encountered in outer heaven. The middle crate, the middle truck. But now he had a feeling. Instinct told him that at this stage of the game, Colonel Katafi would be ringing in some changes. He thought for the first time the middle crate would be the safe one. And it was. One more time, Solid Snake's instincts had served him well. The middle crate held the rocket launcher. Behind the crates, he saw a door, partially hidden behind one of the pillars that held up the ceiling. Using keycard 6, Hallie got the door open. Inside was Dr. Petrovich. At last! Solid Snake took an eager step forward, then stopped. All of his highly developed Snake Man instincts told him that something was wrong here. He smelled a trap. Where were the guards? There ought to be guards inside the room with a prisoner as vitally important in the Metal Gear project as Dr. Petrovich. Taking off one of the mines from his arsenal, Hallie rolled it gently across the floor to where the doctor was sitting tied to a chair. The man didn't move, not so much as the flicker of an eyelash. "This isn't the scientist," Solid Snake said to himself. "It's a dummy. A booby-trapped dummy." Solid Snake fired a burst from his Mach 2, and the thing exploded, shattering into wires and stuffing. Hallie hurled himself to the floor and covered his head the same instant that the mine under the dummy's chair went off with an ear-shattering blast. As he picked himself up and brushed the fragments from his uniform, Justin and Hallie discovered in the debris on the floor keycard 7. The radio began to beep at him as control signal was received again. Hallie heard the same female voice. "Jennifer here. I have a compass for you. Follow my signal. Over." A thin, high signal began to emanate from the transceiver, and a second or two later, it was matched by a transmission coming from one of the locked rooms in the hallway. Using keycard 4, Solid Snake located the compass. The room next door was unlocked by keycard 6. It held no prisoners. Nothing but a small bottle. Cautiously, Hallie opened it, held it away from his nose, and with his other hand fanned a little of the fumes toward his face, and took a sniff. Solid Snake recognized the odor of the chemical from his training with the Snake Men. It was an all-purpose antidote to a number of deadly poisons. Quickly, he tucked the little bottle into his uniform belt. Suddenly, Justin Hallie heard the heavy thumping of running boots. Terrorist guards were on the way. He had to get out of there. He raced down a corridor, through a back door, and down a set of stairs that took him directly into a desert. A desert? Here in the jungle? Impossible. At least in nature. No, it had to be man-made. Another trap of Katafi's. Heaven only knew what awaited Solid Snake in the sands of a terrorist's phony desert. Oddly, Hallie felt elated. The presence of the unlikely desert, here in the middle of nowhere, led him to believe that he was much closer to Metal Gear than before. The more difficult the obstacle, the nearer to the goal. As Justin Halley took out his compass to lead him across the desert, he heard a strange whirring noise. It sounded like something shuffling across the hot sands. Something huge and dangerous. Before he could react to the sound, 3 giant creatures slowly came into view. Halley was nervous. These were trained killer scorpions. Katafi used them to destroy his enemies. And now they were coming at him. Poisonous stings held high in the sting position. What a horrifying sight! Even a man with the courage of Marine Captain Justin Halley had to turn pale. The trained killer scorpions were mutants, raised to grow between 15 and 17 feet high. Their poison stings were as long as thick as a javelin. They had eyes that bugged out of their heads on stalks, and the stalks kept twisting this way and that, searching for their quarry. And they'd caught sight of Solid Snake. He could tell because a horrifying, high-pitched buzzing came out of the 3 of them, the sound of evil excitement. Slowly they turned in his direction, and slowly they moved toward Halley. Their bodies were covered with scales, and the scales made a sickening noise as they dragged across the burning sands of the desert. The curled tails of the trained killer scorpions were raised high, poised to strike, to sting, and to kill. They were slow, but what was the need for haste? Where could Solid Snake go? The desert, seemingly stretching around him for miles, was empty of shelter, and the sun was hot enough to broil a man alive. He had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. But the scorpions loved the desert heat. They thrived in it and grew to enormous sizes. All they needed to survive was furnace heat and the frequent opportunity to make a kill. Justin Halley would have to stand and fight. He sorted through his weapons as the trained killer scorpions came closer. He could smell them now. They smelled foul. Solid Snake fired again and again until the clip of his Beretta was empty. They still came, dragging their scales over the burning sands. Nothing seemed to stop them. Not Halley's grenades, nor his MAC-2. He braced himself, dropping a rocket down the breech of his rocket launcher and aiming through the sight. Solid Snake slammed his head on the trigger button, and the rocket exploded from the tube. One scorpion exploded in a noxious burst of matter. He fired again. The rocket launcher was hot to the touch. The disposable firing tube wouldn't take much more use. A miss. Another rocket launched, then another, and the second of the trained killer scorpions blew apart messily. But the third one kept coming at Halley. Nothing appeared to faze the creature, not even the sudden, explosive death of its brothers. Loading the rocket launcher, Halley hit the trigger button, but it misfired, and the rocket wasn't launched. Was the rocket launcher still operational? There seemed to be no stopping this evil creature. Ammunition of any kind showed no effect on it. Scorpion would have to be hit head on, with everything he had. Solid Snake waited until the monster was almost on top of him. He waited until he could see the color of the creature's beady eyeball. It was green. Then and only then did he turn and aim the rocket launcher dead on target. But would the launcher fire or misfire again? Boom! The last explosion caught the giant lumbering creature full in the chest. With an eerie high scream, it blew into a million pieces. Solid Snake was clear.